The war had lasted for 3,000 years, and nobody remembered how it started anymore. The causes were buried under mountains of dead and oceans of blood that stretched across 100 star systems. What mattered now was simply survival, simply victory, simply the next battle, and the one after that. The Galactic Concordat stood on one side of this ancient conflict. They were an alliance of 12 great civilizations, each one powerful beyond human imagination. The Alari were beings of pure thought who could move ships with their minds and speak across the void without any machine. The Crithans were creatures of living crystal who grew their starships from seeds and bonded with them like family. The Morvathi were the oldest of all, ancient beings who had learned to bend gravity itself to their will thousands of years. Before most species learned to make fire, on the other side stood the Vethkai Dominion, a race of hunters who saw the universe as their hunting ground and every other species as prey. They were tall and terrible, with eyes that could see light no other creature could perceive. Their ships were fast and deadly, and their warriors knew no mercy and no fear. For 3,000 years, they had pushed against the Concordat, and for 3,000 years, the war had ground on without end. The Concordat had tried everything to win. They had built weapons that could crack planets open like eggs. They had created shields that could stop a sun from burning. They had bred soldiers and grown armies and sacrificed billions upon billions of their children to the hungry mouth of war. But nothing worked for long. The Vethkai always adapted, always found a way, always came back stronger. And through all of this, through 3 millennia of blood and fire and death, there was one small world that knew nothing of the greater conflict. Earth sat in an unremarkable corner of an unremarkable galaxy, orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. Its people looked up at the night sky and wondered if they were alone. They sent radio signals into the darkness and waited for answers that never came. They dreamed of meeting other beings among the stars, never knowing that those beings had already found them and decided they were not worth the trouble. The Concordat had discovered humanity 200 years before the present day. A survey ship had passed through their system and scanned their world and recorded everything about them. The report had been filed and forgotten. Just another primitive species on just another primitive world. The humans had barely reached their own moon. They still fought wars over land and resources and ideas. They lived for less than a century and spent most of that time struggling against each other. Class 7 pre-emergent civilization, the report had labeled them. No strategic value. Recommend quarantine and non-interference. Species show some potential, but is currently too fragile and too divided for contact. Estimated time to emergence, 500 to 1,000 years. The Galactic Council had agreed without much debate. Earth would be left alone. A warning beacon was placed at the edge of their system to tell all ships to stay away. Humanity would be allowed to grow in peace, protected from the horrors of the greater war. It was a kindness, the Council believed. The humans were soft creatures who felt things too deeply. They would be destroyed by the reality of galactic conflict. They are emotional beings, the Alari ambassador had noted in the official record. They form strong bonds with each other and experience great pain when those bonds are broken. Exposure to warfare on a galactic scale would likely cause mass psychological trauma. They might never recover. Better to let them develop in isolation until they are ready. The Morvathi elder had agreed in her slow and ancient way. Young species need time to grow hard, she had said. The universe is cruel, and only the strong survive. Let the humans have their peace while they can. War will find them eventually, but let it not be today. And so Earth was forgotten. The beacon kept ships away, and the war raged on in distant parts of the galaxy. And humans continued to live their small lives without any idea of what existed beyond their tiny corner of space. They built cities and wrote songs and fell in love and died without ever knowing how close the fire burned. The Concordat fought on year after year, century after century. Worlds burned and species died, and the war continued without end. The Alari lost 3 of their sacred homeworlds. The Krithans saw 2 of their great hive fleets destroyed. The Marvathi, ancient and proud, watched their children fall by the millions. But still they fought, because the alternative was extinction. How much longer can we endure this? The Krythan Hive Mother asked at one council meeting. We grow weaker with each passing century, while the Vethkai grow stronger. We need new allies, new resources, new hope. There is no one left, the Alori ambassador replied. Every species capable of warfare has already joined one side or the other. We have no more allies to find. What about the humans? Someone asked, almost as a joke. The council laughed. The humans were primitives who had not even left their own solar system. What could they possibly offer against an enemy that had conquered 1,000 worlds? Perhaps in another millennium, the Marvathi elder said, when they have grown and learned and hardened themselves against the darkness. But not now. They are children still, and this is no war for children. The council agreed. And the matter was closed, and humanity remained in their quarantine, blissfully unaware of the storm that raged among the stars. But the universe does not care about plans or predictions or the careful calculations of ancient beings. The universe is chaos, and chaos does not follow rules. Somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, a wounded Vethkai dreadnought was running for its life, its engines failing and its crew desperate. It needed to escape, needed to hide, needed to do something to save itself from the Concordat hunters on its trail, and in its desperation, it found the path to Earth. The warning beacon tried to turn it away, but the dreadnought was beyond caring about warnings. It burst through the quarantine zone and emerged into human space. And in that moment, everything changed. The humans did not know it yet, but their time of peace was over. The war they had been protected from was coming to their doorstep. And nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same again. The stars above Earth shone bright and peaceful that night, and billions of humans looked up at them without fear. They did not know that death was falling toward them from the sky. They did not know that their world was about to burn. They did not know that this night would be the last night of their innocence, but they would learn. They would all learn. The Vethkai dreadnought hung in the darkness above Earth like a beast waiting to strike. Its captain stood on the command deck and stared down at the blue and green world below. Sensors showed billions of life signs. Billions of primitive creatures living their small lives without any idea what was about to happen to them. The Concordat hunters are 12 hours behind us, the tactical officer reported. Our engines cannot outrun them. We will be destroyed. The captain thought for a long moment. The ship was dying, and there was no escape. But perhaps there was still a way to serve the Dominion one last time. Perhaps there was still a way to make their deaths mean something. Target the population centers, the captain ordered. All weapons. Maximum yield. The officer hesitated for just a moment. Captain, these beings are not part of the war. They are primitives. There is no honor in... Honor is for the living, the captain said. We are already dead. But if we destroy this world, the Concordat will stop to investigate. They will waste time and resources. And our fleet will gain an advantage. Fire the weapons. The officer obeyed, because that was what soldiers did. And the sky above Earth split open with fire. Snow Paulo was the first city to die. 17 million people lived there, and in the span of 11 minutes, they were all gone. The weapon fell from the sky like the fist of an angry god, and where it struck, nothing remained but glass and ash and silence. Mumbai followed 3 minutes later. Then Lagos. Then Jakarta. Then Cairo. City after city vanished in blinding light as the dreadnought emptied its weapons into the helpless world below. By the time the Concordat hunters arrived and destroyed the Vethkai ship, the damage was already done. 117 million humans died that day. The Concordat Council met in emergency session to discuss what had happened. They sent ships to Earth carrying diplomats and doctors and xenopsychologists. They prepared for a species in shock, a civilization shattered by trauma. They brought medicines to help with grief and counselors trained in helping primitive minds cope with sudden loss. What they found when they arrived was something they did not expect. The humans were not screaming. They were not weeping in the streets. They were not frozen in shock or drowning in despair. The humans were quiet, and their silence was more terrifying than any scream could have been. The Allery ambassador landed in what remained of the human government and prepared to offer comfort and aid. She opened her mind to sense their emotions, ready to help them process their grief, and she recoiled in shock at what she found. There was grief, yes, buried deep beneath the surface. There was pain and loss and sorrow beyond measure. But above all of that, covering it like ice over a frozen lake, there was something else. Something cold. Something hard. Something that the Allery had no word for in any of her languages. The humans called it rage. Within 1 week of the attack, the nations of Earth stopped fighting each other. Governments that had been enemies for centuries sat down together and talked. Old hatreds were set aside. Old wounds were forgotten. Borders that had been drawn in blood were erased as if they had never existed. Within 1 month, humanity had formed a single unified government for the first time in its history. They called it the Earth Alliance, and its founding document was written in the ashes of Snow Paulo. Every human who signed it made the same promise: never again. Never again would they be helpless. Never again would they be prey. Within 6 months, human scientists had picked apart the wreckage of the Vethkai dreadnought. They learned its secrets and copied its technology. They built engines that could carry ships between stars and weapons that could crack open moons. They worked without rest, without sleep, without pause. Every human on Earth became part of the effort. Factory workers and farmers, artists and engineers, children and elders. Everyone contributed everything they had. Within 1 year, the first human warship rose from the surface of Earth. It was crude by galactic standards, ugly and rough, and held together with desperate hope. But it flew, and it fought, and it was only the beginning. Within 3 years, humanity had a fleet. The Concordat watched all of this with growing unease. They had expected the humans to collapse, to retreat into themselves, to spend generations healing from their wounds. Instead, the humans had transformed their grief into fuel and their rage into steel. They had not broken under the weight of tragedy. They had been forged by it. The human ambassador arrived at the Galactic Council 5 years after the attack. Her name was Maria Santos, and she had lost her entire family in Snow Paulo. She stood before the assembled representatives of a dozen ancient civilizations, and she did not flinch. She did not bow. She did not beg. "We know about your war," she said. Her voice was calm and steady, but something dangerous lurked beneath the surface. "We know you tried to protect us from it. We know you thought we were too weak, too fragile, too primitive to matter." She paused and looked around the chamber at the aliens who had dismissed her species as children. "You were wrong." The council shifted uncomfortably. The Allery ambassador could feel the cold fire burning in the human's mind. And it frightened her more than any Vethkai war fleet ever had. The beings who attacked our world were Vethkai. Maria Santos continued. "You have been fighting them for 3,000 years. You have lost countless lives and countless worlds. And still the war goes on. It is a complicated conflict," the Morvath the Elder began. "You cannot possibly understand." "We understand enough," the human said, cutting off the ancient being without hesitation. "We understand that they killed our people. We understand that they burned our cities. We understand that they will do it again if given the chance. She stepped forward, and something in her eyes made even the oldest members of the council want to look away. We would like to join the war. Silence fell over the chamber. No one knew what to say. This primitive species that had barely crawled out of its gravity well was asking to fight in a conflict that had lasted longer than their entire civilization. Ambassador Santis, the Allery representative, said carefully, "We appreciate your courage, but you must understand. This war has consumed species far older and far more powerful than your own. What could humanity possibly contribute?" Maria Santis smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "You have been fighting the Vethkai for 3,000 years, she said. "You have matched them weapon for weapon, ship for ship, soldier for soldier. And in 3,000 years, neither side has won." She leaned forward, and her voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. "We will not fight like you. We will not match them. We will break them. We will make them wish they had never heard the name of our species. We will teach them what it means to make an enemy of Earth." The council voted to accept humanity into the war. Some voted yes because they thought the humans might actually help. Others voted yes because they were curious. And some voted yes because they were afraid of what would happen if they said no. None of them understood what they had just unleashed. Maria Santos returned to Earth with the news. And across the planet, humanity prepared for war. They did not celebrate. They did not cheer. They simply got to work. The forges burned day and night. The shipyards never stopped building. And in the hearts of 8 billion humans, a cold flame burned that would not be quenched until the Vethkai paid for what they had done. The galaxy had no idea what was coming, but they would learn soon enough. The Concordat did not know what to do with their new allies. Humanity had ships and soldiers and weapons, but they were so young, so inexperienced. The council decided to ease them into the conflict slowly. They would be given support roles at first: supply runs and medical transports and refugee evacuation. Safe duties that would let them contribute without getting destroyed. Admiral Chen Wei-Lin received her orders with a calm expression that hid the fire burning in her chest. Her fleet of 47 human warships was assigned to protect supply convoys in a quiet sector far from the front lines. It was an insult wrapped in concern, but she accepted it without complaint. "We will prove ourselves," she told her captains. "Not with words, but with actions. Be patient. Our time will come." Her time came sooner than anyone expected. The Battle of Karathmiter began as a routine engagement. A Concordat defensive fleet of 200 ships held position around a strategic station, while 300 Vethkai warships pressed the attack. It should have been a manageable fight. The Concordat had the defensive advantage, and reinforcements were on the way. But the Vethkai had brought something new to this battle, a weapon that disrupted the psychic links the Allery used to coordinate their fleet. Within minutes, the Concordat formation fell into chaos. Ships that had moved as one began to stumble and drift. The Vethkai struck hard and fast, and the defensive line began to crumble. The retreat order came quickly. All Concordat ships were to fall back to secondary positions and regroup. It was standard doctrine. Preserve your forces, live to fight another day. War was mathematics, and dead ships could not fight future battles. Admiral Chun received the order on her bridge. Her fleet was nearby, close enough to see the battle on long-range sensors, close enough to watch as the Concordat ships began to turn away from the fight. "Ma'am," her tactical officer said, "we have orders to retreat with the main fleet." Chen Wei-Lin stood very still for a long moment. On her display, she could see the Vethkai ships pursuing the retreating Concordat vessels. She could see the station that would fall without protection. She could see the thousands of civilians who would die when it did. She thought about Snow Paulo. She thought about her brother who had died there. She thought about the promise every human had made in the ashes of that day. "No," she said. Her officers looked at her with wide eyes. "Mom?" I said no. "We are not retreating. All ships, attack formation. We are going in." Her communications officer hesitated. "Admiral, the Concordat fleet is withdrawing. If we engage alone, we will be outnumbered 6-1. Chen Wei-Lin turned to face her crew, and something in her eyes made them all stand a little straighter. "Broadcast on all frequencies," she said. "Let our allies hear. Let the enemy hear. Let the whole galaxy hear." She took a breath. Remember Snow Paulo? The human fleet did not retreat. It charged 47 ships against nearly 300. It was suicide by any calculation. The Concordat commanders watching from safe distance expected to see the humans annihilated in minutes. Some of them felt guilty for not helping. Others simply shook their heads at the waste of brave but foolish lives. But then something strange began to happen. The human ships did not fight like Concordat ships. They did not maintain formation or follow established tactics. They scattered and regrouped and scattered again like a pack of wolves hunting prey. They dove into the Vethkai formation with no regard for their own safety. And they used weapons that made the Concordat observers gasp in horror: nuclear warheads, kinetic bombardment, chemical agents that ate through hull metal like acid. The humans had brought weapons that the Concordat had banned centuries ago. Weapons deemed too cruel, too destructive, too uncivilized for honorable warfare. The humans did not care about honor. They cared about winning. The Vethkai formation broke apart as human ships tore through it like a blade through flesh. Where the Concordat had traded shots at long range, the humans closed to point blank and emptied everything they had. Where the Concordat had retreated when damaged, the humans kept fighting until their ships were nothing but burning wreckage, and then came the moment that would haunt Concordat dreams for generations. The human cruiser Vengeful Star took a direct hit to its engine core. The ship was crippled, drifting, unable to escape. Its crew was dead or dying. By every rule of warfare, it was finished. But the ship did not stop its remaining crew. Barely a dozen survivors used their last reserves of power to turn the dying cruiser toward the Vethkai flagship. They accelerated on emergency thrusters. And as they closed the distance, they began to sing the Concordat had never heard human war songs before. They were harsh and strange and filled with a desperate beauty that made no sense to alien minds. The survivors of the Vengeful Star sang of home and family and defiance. They sang of death and glory and revenge. They sang until the moment their ship struck the Vethkai flagship and detonated its reactor core. The flagship vanished in a ball of fire that took 3 other Vethkai ships with it. The remaining human vessels pressed their advantage with savage intensity. Ship after ship threw itself at the enemy with no regard for survival. When weapons failed, they used their hulls as battering rams. When engines died, they overloaded reactors and turned themselves into bombs. By the end of the battle, humanity had lost 31 of their 47 ships. Over 8,000 human soldiers were dead. It was a catastrophic loss by any measure, but the Vethkai had lost over 100 vessels. Their flagship was destroyed. Their attack on Kareth Minor had failed. And for the first time in 3,000 years, they were retreating from a battle they should have won. Admiral Chun Wei-Lin stood on the bridge of her battered flagship and watched the enemy flee. Her uniform was stained with blood from a wound on her forehead. Her ship was barely holding together. But she was alive, and she had won. Send a message to Concordat Command, she said. Her communications officer waited. Tell them the battle is over. Tell them the station is secure. And tell them. She paused and looked out at the field of wreckage and fire that had once been a Vethkai fleet. Tell them this is how humans fight. The message spread through the Concordat like wildfire. Recordings of the battle were watched and rewatched by military commanders across the galaxy. They saw humans diving into certain death without hesitation. They saw crews singing as they died. They saw ships ramming enemies rather than surrendering. The Allery commander, who had ordered the retreat, filed his report with trembling hands. He had seen many terrible things in his long life. He had witnessed atrocities and massacres and the death of worlds. But nothing had prepared him for what he saw at Kirith Minor. "They do not fight like soldiers," he wrote. "They fight like something older and darker. Something we thought the universe had left behind long ago. They fight like animals, like demons, like the nightmares our ancestors told stories about. They have no regard for their own lives. They have no concept of acceptable losses. They will spend every last one of their people if it means victory." He paused before adding the final line. "We did not recruit an ally. We unleashed a monster. And now we must pray that monster remains on our side." The Vethkai High Command received their own reports from the survivors of Kirith Minor. They learned about the human weapons, the human tactics, the human willingness to die. And for the first time in 3,000 years, they felt something they had almost forgotten: fear. The humans had announced themselves to the galaxy, and nothing would ever be the same. The years after Kirith Minor changed everything. Humanity was no longer a joke or a curiosity. They were a force to be feared. The Concordat gave them more ships, more resources, more freedom to fight as they wished. And the humans used every advantage they were given. But Admiral Chen Weilin and her generals knew that raw ferocity would only carry them so far. The Vethkai were learning, adapting, preparing for human tactics. They had begun to counter the ramming attacks and predict the human formations. If humanity wanted to win this war, they needed something more than courage and rage. They needed a strategy that would break the enemy completely. General Yukio Kankawa was the one who found it. She was a quiet woman with gray hair and calm eyes that hid a mind sharper than any blade. She had spent her life studying enemies and finding their weaknesses. And after 2 years of analyzing the Vethkai, she had found the weakness that would destroy them: light. The Vethkai had evolved on a world bathed in the radiation of 3 suns. Their eyes could see spectrums that no other species could perceive. They communicated with their ships using light-based signals that travel faster than any radio wave. Their sensors tracked energy signatures across vast distances. Everything about their civilization was built around light and the brightness of space. The Vethkai were supreme. Their fleets moved with perfect coordination. Their ships could see enemies coming from light years away. Their advantage in any open battle was almost impossible to overcome. But what happens? General Akonkawa asked the War Council. If we take the light away? The room fell silent. The Concordat admirals looked at each other with confusion. The Allery representative tilted her head in a way that meant she did not understand. Take the light away? The Marvathi elder said slowly. What do you mean? General Okenkawa activated the display in the center of the room. It showed a detailed plan with diagrams and calculations and projected outcomes. The plan had a name, written in stark letters at the top: Project Erebus Stars, produce light, the general explained. Without that light, the Vethkai are blind. Their communications fail. Their sensors become useless. Their fleet coordination collapses. So we will block the light of stars in the contested sectors. That is impossible, the Krythan commander said. You cannot block a star. The energy required would be beyond any technology we possess. You are thinking too big, Okonkawa replied. We do not need to extinguish the stars. We only need to block their light from reaching the battlefield. Stellar shades, gravity lensing fields, light-absorbing nanite clouds. Crude technology by your standards, but effective. We can create zones of darkness throughout the contested sectors. The Allery ambassador shook her head. Even if this works, you would be fighting in total darkness. Your species cannot see without light either. You would be just as blind as the Vethkai. General Okonkwo smiled, and it was the first genuine smile anyone had seen from her. That is where you are wrong. She changed the display to show images from Earth. Images of humans hunting in forests at night. Images of soldiers moving through pitch-black buildings. Images of submarines stalking prey in the lightless depths of oceans. Humans evolved on a world with darkness, she said. Half of our existence was spent in night. Our ancestors hunted in shadows and hid from predators in the dark. We developed tools to navigate without sight. We learned to use sound and touch and instinct. Darkness is not our enemy. She looked around the room at the alien faces watching her. Darkness is our home. The Concordat voted to approve Project Erebus with great reluctance. Many of the older species thought it was madness. They had spent 3,000 years fighting in the light of stars. And the idea of deliberately creating darkness seemed wrong, almost evil, but they were desperate. And the humans promised results. The first test came 6 months later in the Kylo system. Human ships deployed a network of stellar shades around the local sun. The shades were thin sheets of light-absorbing material, miles across, positioned to block sunlight from reaching the inner planets. Within hours, the system went dark. The Vethkai garrison was caught completely unprepared. Their communications failed as light-based signals could not penetrate the darkness. Their sensors showed nothing but void. Their ships began to drift apart, each one isolated and alone, and then the humans came. The human strike teams moved through the darkness like ghosts. They used sonar and heat signatures and old instincts that their ancestors had developed millions of years ago. They found the blind Vethkai ships and destroyed them one by one. Number warning, no mercy, no survivors. The Battle of Kylos was over in 12 hours. The entire Vethkai garrison was wiped out without a single human casualty. Word of the victory spread through the Concordat and the Dominion alike. Some celebrated, but many more were disturbed. What the humans had done seemed almost unnatural. Fighting in darkness, striking without being seen, turning the very light of stars into a weapon. The Vethkai High Command held emergency meetings to discuss the new threat. Their greatest advantage had been neutralized. Their superior senses were now a weakness. They tried to develop countermeasures, but how do you counter an enemy who lives in darkness? They are not like other species, the Vethkai war leader told his commanders. They do not fight for territory or resources or honor. They fight because something inside them demands it. They will accept any cost, endure any suffering, sacrifice anything for victory. We cannot outspend them because they do not count their losses. We cannot outlast them because they do not know how to give up. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was heavy with something that sounded almost like respect. For the first time in our history, we face an enemy that wants to win more than we do. Project Erebus expanded across the contested sectors. System after system went dark as human ships deployed their light-blocking technology. The stars that had burned for billions of years were hidden behind curtains of human design. And in that darkness, humanity hunted the Concordat, watched in amazement and horror as the tide of war began to turn. Human fleets struck from nowhere and vanished into nothing. Vethkai supply lines were cut in the darkness. Vethkai outposts were destroyed without ever seeing their attackers. The Dominion that had been unconquerable for 3,000 years was suddenly bleeding from 1,000 wounds. The Allery ambassador sent a report to her government, describing what she had witnessed. She had followed a human fleet into the darkness of a blocked system and watched them work. They moved through the void without fear. She wrote, "Where we saw nothing, they saw opportunity. Where we felt terror, they felt comfort." I asked one of their commanders how they could bear it. Fighting in the endless dark, And she looked at me with eyes that held no uncertainty. She said, "We spent 100,000 years afraid of the dark. Our ancestors huddled around fires and told stories of monsters in the shadows. But we learned. We adapted. We became the thing that others fear in the darkness. The Vethkai should have left us alone." The ambassador ended her report with a warning. "The humans have done something remarkable. They have turned their greatest weakness into their greatest strength. But I wonder if they understand the cost. They have become comfortable with darkness, comfortable with killing without being seen, comfortable with victory at any price. What will they become when this war is over? What kind of species emerges from shadows like these?" She had no answer, and perhaps that was the most frightening thing of all. The war continued, and the stars remained dark, and humanity pushed deeper into Vethkai space with every passing month. The end was coming. Everyone could feel it. But what kind of end it would be, no one could say. The end came not with a final battle, but with a surrender 18 years after humanity joined the war. The Vethkai Dominion requested peace. Their fleets were shattered. Their homeworlds were surrounded. Their once proud empire had been reduced to a handful of systems fighting for survival. They had lost more territory in 2 decades than they had gained in 3 millennia. And they had lost it all to a species that had been considered too primitive to matter. The peace conference was held on a neutral station at the edge of Concordat space. Representatives from every species in the galaxy came to witness the end of the longest war in recorded history. They filled the observation galleries and lined the corridors and watched through holographic displays. Everyone wanted to see this moment. The Vethkai delegation arrived first. The hierarch of the Dominion led them, a towering figure with compound eyes that had once seen more than any other being in the galaxy. Now those eyes were dim with exhaustion and defeat. The hierarch walked slowly, each step heavy with the weight of failure. The human delegation arrived second. They were led by a woman named Amara Asay, who had been chosen specifically for this moment. She had been a child in Snow Paulo when the bombs fell. She had been pulled from the rubble by rescue workers and had spent the next 18 years watching her species transform into something new. Now she would speak for all of humanity. At the end of the war, they had joined too late to start, but not too late to finish. The Great Hall fell silent as the 2 delegations faced each other across a simple table. The galaxy held its breath. The hierarch spoke first, its translator converting its words into sounds that human ears could understand. "Before we discuss terms," it said, "I must know something. We have studied your species since the war began. We have tried to understand how you did what you did. But one question remains, and I must have an answer if I am to accept the death of my civilization." Amara Asay nodded. "Ask your question." The hierarch leaned forward, its massive body trembling with emotion. "How?" it asked. "You are young. Your species has existed for barely a heartbeat by galactic standards. You are fragile. Your bodies break easily, and your lives end in mere decades. We have conquered species 1,000 times your age. We have destroyed empires that had mastered technologies you cannot imagine. How did you defeat us?" The human delegation was silent. Amara Asay looked at the broken ruler of a broken empire, and something flickered in her eyes. It might have been sympathy, or it might have been satisfaction. It was hard to tell. "You are right," she said finally. Her voice was soft, but it carried through the silent hall. "We are fragile. We break easily. We live short lives and die young. Everything you said about us is true." She stood slowly, and something about her presence made the hierarch lean back despite itself. "But our ancestors learned something a long time ago, something that it seems the rest of the galaxy forgot. Or perhaps never knew." She walked around the table until she stood directly before the hierarch. She was small compared to the alien, barely reaching its chest. But somehow she seemed larger. The flame that burns briefest often burns brightest, she said. We do not have centuries to plan our wars. We do not have millennia to calculate our victories. We have now. We have this moment and the moments that follow. And we do not waste them. The hierarch stared at her with eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. You measured war and acceptable losses. Amara continued. You calculated the cost of each battle and weighed it against the gain. You had forever, so you fought like you had forever. Patient and careful and measured. Her voice hardened. We do not have forever. We have a handful of decades if we are lucky. So we do not fight to survive. We fight to win. And we will pay any price for that victory. Any price at all. She reached into her pocket and withdrew something small. It was a handful of ash in a sealed container. She placed it on the table between them. This is all that remains of my mother, she said. She died in Snow Paulo when your ship attacked our world. I have carried her ashes with me for 18 years. I have carried them through every battle and every victory. I have carried them so I would never forget why we fight. The hierarch looked at the small container with something that might have been horror or understanding or both. You killed 117 million of our people in a single day, Amara said. You thought it would break us. You thought we would collapse under our grief and never rise again. But you do not understand humans. She leaned closer, and her voice dropped to barely a whisper. Grief does not make us weak. Grief makes us strong. Loss does not make us give up. Loss makes us fight harder. You gave us a reason to unite, a reason to build, a reason to become something greater than we were. You forged us into a weapon, and then you were surprised when that weapon was turned against you. The hall was utterly silent. Every being in the galaxy was watching, and none of them dared to speak. You asked how we defeated you, Amara said. The answer is simple. You woke us up. For thousands of years we slept in our little corner of the galaxy, fighting amongst ourselves over scraps of land and power. We were divided and weak and blind to our own potential. And then you came.